Hello, everyone. We are back here after GP slash Magic Fest Los Angeles. Um, it was Modern main event tournament that I played in this past weekend, and it was a lot of fun. Modern seemed to be in a great place. People were having fun. Saw boatloads of different decks. The top eight was pretty diverse, all in all. But certainly the top decks were all pretty diverse. I haven't looked at the actual stats, the numbers. I mean, Phoenix was everywhere, of course. People expected that, and it doesn't seem to be so dominant, I don't think. We'll see what the numbers say in the near future, in the coming weeks and months and everything, to see if that deck gets too in a little overboard. But I don't think it will. Overall, I think Modern's in a pretty good place, and people seem to be excited about it. Also, quick note on the rebranding that Wizards did on these Magic Fests. Certainly, I mean, it was a GP, right? I've also been going to GPs more recently in the last few years, where they've turned into more of conventions. But you could tell it was a little bit more supported. Definitely more cosplay, and the cosplayers were playing Magic, and looks like you could challenge them in Commander or things like that for people who are into that kind of thing. Guys like what's his name, Cassius Marsh, who I got to quick say hi to, is a really cool guy, the NFL player who plays Magic. He was there playing Commander with people. So just a lot of stuff that Wizards is doing to bring more people in casually. And definitely they were supporting the side events a whole lot more and having, high prize pool value side events, like big tournament side events. And there were more people doing that than there were playing the main event, which is really good for Magic as a whole, as a game, to make sure these GPs are bringing, multiple thousands of people in attendance, even if the main tournament itself was, I would guess, was probably in the 12 to 1500 range. So if they can, main tournament attendance might decrease, but if they're having overall increase in numbers of people attending these events and playing in other events during the weekend, I think that's good for the game and good for us as fans of the game. So this is the decklist I ended up running with. I had some. I obviously don't get to play in paper very often at all, so I don't always have this deck or anything updated in paper very often. So I had pre-ordered some cards to pick up the morning of the GP, and the order got messed up, but luckily the vendor helped me out and got me all the pieces as best as they could, minus a couple, and I didn't have time to go to another vendor to look for it. But just a couple things were missing. I had decided I was not going to run Cabal and just run just one damping sphere. But they couldn't get the damping sphere, so I ended up running the Cabal. They didn't have any Field of Ruins for me, and I only had two, so I ended up running 2 Field of Ruins, 2 Ghost Quarter, which is, whatever. And then, it didn't really seem to be relevant. I still like Field of Ruin better, I think. But there's in corner case arguments for where Ghost Quarter could be a little bit better, but it didn't make a lot of difference in this tournament, at least. And then they couldn't get me a Gideon. They didn't have any, which kind of worked out because I had actually was thinking on the drive up to LA that morning that I didn't like only running 2 Sorens, because I was doing 2 Sorens and a Gideon. Just felt the life gain was really that important. And so I was really not disappointed I didn't get the Gideon. I actually wanted an excuse to try out the 3rd Soren instead. So I went with it, and I was happy I did. We'll get into the matches later, but Soren was pretty crucial for me. If you guys were paying attention to previous lists, mana base is very similar. I just cut a swap for a 4 Shambling Vent. That did end up being relevant. There were many games where I really found myself, had kind of flooded out or was just really needing some last little piece of interaction, and even just being able to chump attack and gain 2 life when you've got a active Bitter Blossom going or something like that, or having a 2/3 blocker for a Tarmogoyf or a Death Shadow or in the case of this tournament, a what's it called, a reality smasher, right? That's your, you know, chump blocking a 5/5 trampler, but still taking 0 total. It's kind of nice. So it's it was pretty relevant to have 4, and having 1 less basic didn't come up, which was fine. So yeah, this is the list. I think changes I would make right away are just based on this list, of course. I think Kambal is good. It's hard to know if you want Damping Sphere or Kambal, or taking out something else for a Damping Sphere. But it really just kind of depends on the matchups. One thing I forgot to, in paper was running 3 surgicals and not the 2 and 1 extirpate. I'm just don't really want to spend $50 on Magic Online to upgrade this into a surgical extraction. So I'm going to stick with the extirpate here online for the time being. But in paper, I had 3 surgicals, and I do think that's correct. I think the matches where you need this card, this card, you just have to be able to cast it no matter what in that exact moment, and having to leave open black mana can be pretty tough, even though there are some upsides with this against certain decks. Against, Phoenix and Dredge are the 2 popular decks right now. You just have to have it before they can, do something on their turn or respond or whatever it is to it. So, or wait until the next turn cycle for it. And it's less relevant that they can, respond with a fetch land to get their blood gassed out or whatever it is. I find that you can time a surgical well, 90+% of the time to where it doesn't really matter. And against Phoenix, it doesn't matter, right? They can't bring the Phoenixes out of the graveyard at instant speed anyway. So the surgical's just better against that deck, and that's a big part of the metagame right now. So there's other decks that we don't need to go into the details where this has some validity to it, but I think this is still correct. I just don't want to spend $50 on Magic Online for for that corner case. And then what I would do right off the bat is change Damnation to Wrath of God. Just mana-wise, it just makes sense, right? We're already running Settle against some of these decks. We're running Oriach Champion and Histories and Spectrals and whatnot. Liliana's the only double black card, and so I'm going to be deprioritizing double black, and some of the decks you want Wrath, you don't want Liliana anyway. Some you do, but I think just mana-wise is just probably better to do this. So I think that's all the changes to the list. I was pretty happy with it overall. The record was not great. We'll get into those details in a minute, but I did think the list was solid. I think there's always tweaks and changes to be made, but a lot of it is really just part of it's personal preference. I think part of it's just the metagame you expect. We've had some discussions in our Facebook group about Oriach Champion, Liliana, History of Benalia, Spectral Procession, all those things, and I think so much of it just depends on your metagame, right? If you are finding yourself running into a lot of Dredge and Grixis Death Shadow and Burn, then you're certainly going to want Oriach Champion main deck, and it's going to seem great. If you're running into those decks a lot, and I think part of why, as much as I love this card and I've ran it main deck for a long time, I just find that in the competitive queues in Magic Online, which is where I play, 90+% of my Modern right now, I'm running into a lot of blue-white control, a lot of Tron, a lot of the Artifact Prison decks, and, the creature decks are humans and spirits, sometimes boggles, of which Oriach Champion doesn't help us with any of that, which is why I find it harder to main deck. And again, against Control and Tron and boggles, and not that I see that much, but the artifact decks, I would much rather have Liliana against all those decks than the Oriach Champion. I did go up to 3 sideboard, may even go up to 4. I'd have to tweak the numbers a little bit and kind of see how the metagame shapes out. But the big tiebreaker for me was that I don't love Oriach Champion against the Phoenix decks. I think that is where my tiebreaker lies. Between running main deck Liliana and main deck Auriok Champion. Phoenix has been, after I've, once, when it first came out, I think I was losing it to a little bit more, but now that I've played it a good amount on Magic Online, I'm certainly winning way more than I'm losing against it. I would say up to like 70-30 in the last, it's hard to say. I haven't played that much, but probably the first few times I played Phoenix, I was probably one or two out of the 4 or 5 times I played it, and now I probably played it, I don't know, 8 more times, of which I probably won 6 of those, right? So it's gone up significantly. I think just learning the matchup and how we need to interact with them and what's important. And I've just found Liliana to take care of Thing in the Ice, or just to, they're basically a Storm deck, right? So against Storm, I do like Liliana also, even though it's kind of slow. Like, you're just denying them resources by having them discard cards. And also in the corner case, you get to kill their, Brawl or Electromancer or Thing in the Ice in the case of the Phoenix decks. So I have found her to be good in those matchups. And Auriok Champion not so much in that. And that's been my tiebreaker right now, I think. If the numbers were skewed more in a different direction to where the most popular decks were Dredge and Burn, I would probably switch it over. So I think that's, in talking to everybody, I think that's been the big difference in main decking this card for me, is just that I'm just not running into, the Bushwhacker decks or the Burn. I haven't played Burn, in 5 leagues that I did in the past few weeks prep for this. I didn't play a single Burn deck. I didn't play a Burn Bushwhacker deck. I played one Grixis Death Shadow deck, even though I know that deck is popular. I played Dredge a couple times and it was good there, but I think it's just, you're obviously going to be, we are all biased by the matchups that we are running into more often, and it's really hard to know mathematically, what's most correct. But that's my spiel. Hope that makes sense to everybody. But that's Modern. I think it's just so much of this is just matchup dependent, and our deck especially is victim to that, right? We're not necessarily a very linear, non-interactive deck, and so we are very matchup dependent. Last thing I want to say, I did run into a fan at the GP, which was really cool. Someone was a fan of the videos and recognized me. So want to say what's up and a shout out to you. Had a good little chat, talking about the deck and talking about trying to play Magic while having infants. So that was a lot of fun. So I want to say what's up, man. And it was good to chat with you for a couple minutes on Saturday. So onto the deck, onto the day. Did not go well. Went 3-3. I'll kind of walk through the matches, and I think it was, it was just kind of victim to what Magic does sometimes. But match, and I'll kind of, I want to explain the losses and realize how I think that it, very easily the day could have changed and turned out much, much differently. Match 1 was against Hardened Scales Affinity. Kind of got run over game 1. But games 2 and 3 I won pretty handedly. Kaya certainly did some work in there. That minus was great. It was good to have as an option. Actually, was one of the games. I think she just exiled the 1/1 modular, the 1-drop. But there was many points in the games where she would have been great, just exiling Hardened Scales, exiling the modular creature, Mox Opals. Hangerback Walker is a huge one to exile. So I think the fact that her -1 exiles the permanents and not just destroys is pretty relevant. So again, I didn't end up needing her much. I think just having that 1- kind of was enough for me to kind of overrun them. But overall, the matchup went pretty well. Obviously, it's one where Liliana's very bad, so sided out Liliana's, but bringing Stony Silences, Disenchant, Fragmentize, and I think that, and Settle the Wreckage. Didn't bring in Wrath of God or Damnation, because, again, a lot of the modulars and the Hangerback Walkers and Although I guess it could still work pretty well. I just figured the settle was enough. Took out some Thoughtseizes and Lilianas, and I think that was all she wrote. Pretty well. Match number 2 is colorless Eldrazi, like Eldrazi aggro. Smashers, Thought-Knot-Seers, Matter Reshapers, and the 2/1, the Mimic, and then actually, weirdly enough, running Smuggler's Copters, which I found was pretty interesting. So this deck we've played a lot against, I have at least, tends to be a pretty good matchup. Won pretty easily game 1. Game 2, they played 3, if not all 4 Ratchet Bombs, which was pretty brutal. And that was game 2. They beat me there, still kind of close. And game 3 was real close, super grindy, super long. They had gone through a couple Ratchet Bombs. I had actually had a Stony Silence in my opening hand that I think the big mistake, even though it was probably at least I would say a 15 turn game, like turn cycle game. It was pretty long and grindy. But I just made the mistake of turn 2. I played a Bitter Blossom first and kept the Stony Silence, just, colorless deck. I figured they didn't have discard or counter spells, and I was, guaranteed to drop the Stony Silence the next turn if I wanted to, and just had forgotten Thought-Knot-Seer existed. They hadn't played a Thought-Knot-Seer on me games 1 and 2, and that was my mistake, because they're, it's a card they're obviously going to run, and they were able to take my Stony Silence with Thought-Knot-Seer on their turn 3. Turn 2, yeah, I'm not sure. But they took it, and that was pretty brutal for me. So yeah, that was a big mistake I made very, very early on in the game. Obviously, the game went on another 10, 12 turns after that. And I had built a board back up after they'd gone through 2 Ratchet Bombs. They had a Smasher and a Thought-Knot-Seer out, and I had a good amount of tokens. I was kind of pinging them in the air slowly but surely, and had enough chump blockers left to be able to block whatever attack they did, even through something like a Spatial Contortion. They had no cards in hand. I was able to chump block and still wasn't able to kill them the next turn, and they drew a Ratchet Bomb to clear my tokens and attack for lethal. And my opponent even said it as he drew the card. He was pretty embarrassed to have squeaked the win out that way, but there it was. So that was round 2. That put me down to 1-1. Round 3, I beat Phoenix 2-0. It was the most experienced player, but still went pretty well. Again, Kaya did some pretty good work there, exiling Phoenixes and Faithless Lootings and Terramanders when they're on the board. Even when they're 5/5, she took it to exile them, which is good. Sideboarding was kind of same. All 3 Surgicals, Cabal, Settle the Wreckage. Took out, I think, 2 Thoughtseizes, I'm trying to think. Probably took out a Brutality or 2, maybe just 1, and then I usually been shaving a Bitter Blossom or an Intangible Virtue. Just Blossom's a little bit slow for such a fast deck, and Virtue usually only need 1 against them. Having more than that doesn't do too much. You just want to make sure you have enough threats, as they're going to get potentially cleared out by Thing in the Ice. So that was round 3. I went up to 2-1. Round 4, I played against Jund, which another matchup that should be pretty good. And worked out. Pretty grindy games. Very long and grindy game 1 that they ended up taking, I think. No, I can't remember how we split games 1 and 2. The game I won of those, I won pretty handedly. It was just Bitter Blossom and Intangible Virtue. And Jund is running, and Greenback, a friend of mine who's a pretty experienced Modern player, was running Greenback at the tournament. He's been running 4 Assassin's Trophies in just his Rock deck. This player I was playing against was running 4 Assassin's Trophies in his Jund deck. So Jund had usually been trimming on things like Abrupt Decay, which made our Bitter Blossoms a lot better. But now that they're running 4 of those, it makes their matchup against us just a little bit better. We're still heavily favored, and I just had a Bitter Blossom and Intangible Virtue, and then some interaction, and that was able to win me the game. Game 3, I same thing. So what I'd actually done was I kept in Liliana's because I knew they would take out their Liliana's, just because Liliana's not that great against us compared to what we're doing. I took out the Kaya, took out Thoughtseize or 2. I'm trying to think now. I think I definitely brought in Basilisk Collar, brought in Settle the Wreckage, and may have brought in Damnation, but I don't think so for Thoughtseize. They were running Bobs, and so I kept Brutalities, and I had seen an Anger of the Gods game too, so I think I kept a Brutality in there. Figured at the very least I could kill a Bloodbraid Elf for a Bob, or hopefully a Scavenging Ooze. I actually did kill a Scavenging Ooze at one point. But Thoughtseize is just not as good because the only thing you're taking is Bloodbraid Elf, and in general you want less discard spells against Jund. So, but yeah, game 3 was similar to the Eldrazi game. They were attacking me in with an 8/9 Tarmogoyf because of a Bitter Blossom they had killed, and they had also hit my Basilisk Collar with a Kolaghan's Command, which is a bummer because they were. That's how Jund beats us, is just the big Tarmogoyf and Scavenging Ooze beats, which is why I've liked Basilisk Collar a lot against them. And again, that's one where Auriok Champion, even though they can't kill it, and it blocks Bloodbraid Elf, it doesn't block the Tarmogoyfs or Scavenging Oozes that can get big. So that's another one where I don't bring it in, but I'd be interested in hearing people's opinions on bringing an Auriok Champion in a matchup like Jund. I just feel like I'd rather have all my token makers and all my discard spells instead. So also took out Kaya in that matchup. I don't know if I said that already. But yeah, it was just a back and forth of me having to jump block with some tokens, attack with some tokens. They were rightfully so using their Assassin's Trophies and a Maelstrom Pulse on Bitter Blossoms and Virtues, so I couldn't get that going. Had them down to 3 or 5 with the Brutality in hand, and I think I could have utilized this differently, but they ended up again on the turn where I had lethal the next turn, and they had a Tarmogoyf. They were able to draw an Anger of the Gods, cast the Anger of the Gods, wipe my board, and attack me for lethal with the 8/9 Tarmogoyf. So that was the end of that game 3. So that was another brutal loss against a usually favorable matchup. But there's magic for you. Round 5, played Burn. Was able to actually steal game 1 just with Sorin. Game 2, they were able to Path to Exile my Auriok Champion as soon as she came into play. And she was going to be great because they had 2 Swift Spears out, and they hadn't done much because they were putting the Swift Spears out. They hadn't burned me much. So I think I was at like 16 when I got to play Auriok Champion. But tapping out, having them be able to path her, and then bolt me and attack me for 6 with the Swift Spears, and game ended pretty quick. But then game 3, I was able to, just cast a Collective Brutality, Inquisitioned also to take their Searing Blazes and Searing Bloods, and was able to put a board of tokens out and just started chipping away with Sorin lifelinking tokens, lifelinking Lingering Souls tokens with Sorin, and that just cleared the game. So match 5 was Rain against Burn, and then round 6, lost to Green White Elves. It was a pretty good loss. They comboed me out game 1, and then game 2 I was able to answer and win. And then game 3 was pretty long and grindy, but it just didn't have much to sideboard in. I brought in Settle and Wrath, and this one where Thoughtseizes aren't great, Liliana's not great, Kai she was able to, one of the games, just start picking off some elves randomly. I don't know if it was worth it or not, but it was definitely better than anything else I had in the sideboard. What I didn't know is whether I wanted something like Surgical Extraction or Thoughtseize, just to like take their combo piece or whatever it is, so that they, if you take their Azuri, then they're really just a regular old creature beatdown deck, which we should be pretty good against. But that was the third loss. So again, it's not a matchup I've had trouble with in the past, but I hadn't played it in a while, so was still kind of looking back to see if maybe the sideboarding could have gone better. But that was it, 3-3. But as described, two of those matches, the Eldrazi and the Jund, really came down to just a last turn top deck on game 3 by my opponents, which is going to happen, right? And that's why I'm not disappointed. A lot of those I identified the mistakes I could have made, turns earlier in the game, and sometimes it's those small edges, but also to some degree those turns were both just any other draw on both of those would have turned two of those losses into wins. So small margins, which as disappointing as it is for a big GP weekend that I was looking forward to, still makes me feel pretty good about the deck and the deck list, in that a lot of those matchups would have gone pretty well. So that's the rundown. Sorry this went pretty long, but I know a lot of you guys are interested, and people who are not just won't watch this video. But I think the next series I'm going to make is going to be, again, with this list. We'll run it through a queue again, and then I've got some other things I want to try out. I want to try out on stream or on recording a hidden stockpile list, since a lot of people have been trying that card out and have been liking it. Most recently, someone's having some pretty good paper success, one of the guys in our Facebook group, with it. So kind of wanted to try this out, and I'll be doing that as well. And that's going to eventually lead us into Modern Horizons, which was a new exciting announcement last week, that both of the cards that were previewed, both the Sarah Planeswalker and the Cabal Therapy on a stick here, are both cards that I would certainly be interested in trying in our deck. I don't know if they're going to be necessarily the good or staples in here, but given the whole point of this series is to try new cards as they come out, I will be trying those cards as they come out in Modern Horizons in June. We got a couple months to fill, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of other exciting cards that people will talk about going into these decks, and we can decide if we like them or not. But hoping to get a couple more videos in the next few months before Modern Horizons comes out, because I know I'll be doing a lot of videos this summer when that comes out. So want to lead us right into that. So thank you again, everyone, for all the support. Hope this video was interesting. Let me know in the comments if you like this kind of archetype and matchup breakdown, and if so, we'll keep doing it, and we'll see where this takes us. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.